Chapter 46. The Enraged Xian. After the coming-of-age ceremony, Xian could finally take a breather. His days, which were usually jam-packed with training, became relaxed. Though the ingredients he had previously bought for the Foundation elixir were almost exhausted, Xian did not consider buying any more. For him right now had finally stepped into the 8th Duancha, and on this level the benefits of the Foundation elixir were next to nothing. Now, even though the Foundation elixir had lost its use, Xiao refrained from replacing it with a new one. Instead, he told Xian to use this period of time to relax and calm his mental state. The true way of training is to train in bouts and take a break between them. Training yourself to death might backfire and lead one down the wrong path. During these relaxed and happy days, Xian, who was used to toiling every day, felt bored to death, but he had no choice in the matter. Every day, he would only accompany Zana to roam about the city. However, sometimes he would go behind the mountains to train his Do techniques. The current Xian had undoubtedly become the focus of the Z family. Wherever he went, gazes of reverence stuck to him like shadows. And the few respectful greetings here and there made Xian wonder at the difference in treatment before and after his display. Peng, in thick and lush forest of the back mountains, a strong-looking monkey-like shadow dodged and jumped with unbelievable speed. It moved through the forest quickly and nimbly, dodging all obstacles in its path. Then, with a heavy thud, a punch containing and ferocious strength cracked a tree trunk that was at least 2 to 3 meters wide. The crack on the tree spread out continuously, and at last, with a bang, the tree snapped in half. Nimbly avoiding the falling tree, Xian jumped on top of a rock. He aimed his right hand towards his clothes which were hanging on the fallen tree, and a spiral of force suddenly appeared, pulling the clothes towards his palm. Wiping the sweat from his brow, Xian let out a puff of air and slowly put his clothes on. Wearing his clothes messily, Xian's eyebrows suddenly perked up. He squinted his eyes as he looked towards the outside of the woods and let out a chuckle. Xian's mouth twitched into a grim smile as he brushed aside the leaves on his shoulders and started walking out of the forest. Out in the woods, the light from the sun fell down onto his body, seeping into his bones and imparting a warm, cozy feeling deep down. Covering his eyes as he adjusted to the sunlight, Xian slightly tilted his head and saw the form of a woman on a rock not too far away from him. The sun illuminated the tall, graceful girl's delicate figure, highlighting her captivating curves, especially her pair of long, slender, sexy legs. Looking over at Xiao, who was sitting quietly on the rock, Xian rested his hands on the back of his head and slowly walked towards the giant rock. He looked up at the impassive beauty. His gaze fell particularly long on her pair of sensual legs, lingering there for more than a moment. He then sniffled and let out a haughty comment, "Your legs are beautiful. No need to show them off." With just a few words, the cold Xiao's charming face turned dark. Her chest heaving slightly, Xiao bit down her teeth and coldly replied, "Do you know why I came looking for you? To beat up." Withdrawing his hands from his nose, Xiao and casualutes, laughing galatal. "My brother was unoblatemeth. Since I was oratuslas, I, a sister, cannot let them boutrachesk. Xiao spotefale spracia, full of malice. His mouth formandrantiki, Xiaon's lantedrishon, then tell. From your point of view, in such an instantishal took his attack, letting him brefshan string. Xiao be the shirkalat. She still stubber shishik slok, here is filegag the shashnashashathath. No, if he realishatity, your heart will dudlunagly. For a few minutes, then, you would fun felagi, you wildn't ever preferfi. Ha. It's still that same old story again. You Xiao, with a personality, onathat enjoys tuition rishan, what else can you do? Irialifri anglioplate. I feel brotherishan, a minathanamyunta? Xiaoyan sanjodefa wishashantant. Heck olden fel prograced stoa? Fuck you, a big chest buttons, thratcha best wet woe traces. Xiaoyan, you little bastard. Shut your mouth. Herf a second torten, turning green undrafinthan. Finally, Xiao shut out, unable under torsion shanayani, looking at see if a few shanashesh, Xiaon's eyes, filled with bufflistrans ganaa, hishafelda hantly, taking God breath, Xiao slow fragentiful, shegrated 30 no matter what, a one old talet for fostiasta, After saying that, she stepped forward half, gracefully vandeldet. Her stritlix trishoshtwit. With a sudden lifton, Xiao Yan called Queenkus barely avoiding ski. HMPH, no matter how talented you are just an 8-duan I fadon teach your donus, Eurogunsame shashik. Looking at Xion, Haus constantic langsit, Schellaged kroldligly onklislizel. Thiviolent quafraut strag, tossing thillavan drouth. Xiao Yu, having the strength of 3-star doge, Wespafar strong and yakshish, in suchiquicken staffed, show on cold-toned infant attack. Heckle donlidej, in spition the brisk shalatedl, Sharon's faceritate signs. Hesquinted splesh and la 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 la. Xiao Yan blocks Ksharan shoshashazazozes, but with each blosters really, it seemed that she actionis. She didn't go Google-8 stolat, they will that master sturmangeries. Looking at Sigrion triosh, Shayus redlips staff inter. She tipped to it for prain tritle. But when she start statched, Shayon, Huas been of Adersha. Suddenly went for Fostoli Koik. With Xyansk skirt off, Shayu felt tast wandrans. Ashaba Darlandfa, Fadukinchia Theodospia. She weighs about a gufanf, however, the section fall for fres traint. With a Polandapash, Shire Euphenol Bleferschen toll, unexpectedly Fantlangla. Buying Zaden Bleferschens Shy actual Fafaglafak. Asigia Gresprantestefern. Thizmaster Escoit Opera. Thebris and Bosch and Shanday. Suxka Brettelfish, Shisho on. Chapter 47. Blasphemy. Ziyu was startled after hearing Ziyao's vulgar words. With each passing second, as she struggled against her holder with all her might, her face grew redder with exertion and anger. However, Ziyan proved to be stronger. He began to clamp down more tightly onto Ziyu's wrists, causing her hands to slowly numb. After uselessly struggling for another short period of time, Ziyu was forced to give up her futile endeavor. She, feeling deep shame, glowered at Ziyan, her ample chest heaving slightly as she scolded him, "Little bastard." "Let me go." Shayon opened his mouth, wincing at the waves of pain washing the bruises caused him. He took a few deep breaths and looked down sneering. "Let you go? Did I get hit for nothing? I said I was going to rape you today." To have someone many years younger than her pin her down and also have that person threaten repeatedly to rape her. Ziyu didn't know whether to cry or laugh as she firmly believed that Ziyan would not do such a thing. Twisting her wrists, Ziyu still couldn't get away. She could only bat her eyes at him and snort at the absurdity of the situation. "You little bastard, you haven't even grown yet. Say those things when you've actually matured." With his manhood being called into question, Ziyan immediately furrowed his brows. Lowering his head, he maliciously responded, "You want to try me?" Feeling somewhat threatened by Ziyan's intense stare, Ziyu swallowed heavily. Being the arrogant person she was, she wouldn't submit. She instead stubbornly lifted her snow-white chin and with a cold smile taunted, "If you dare try, he'll castrate you." Pursing his lips, Ziyan felt frustration as he looked down at this woman. If he were asked, Ziyan, even though terribly annoyed with Ziyu, didn't want to go as far as committing such a terrible crime like rape. No matter how you said it, she was still his older cousin. But, given the circumstances, if Ziyan were to back down, wouldn't he have suffered for nothing? Eyes slightly narrowing, Ziyan bit his lips. Suddenly, fiercely, he pushed her down and pressed himself tightly against her body. Ziyan's abrupt movement stunned Ziyu and her mouth opened slightly. She still hadn't registered the shock of being violated. As Ziyan ignored the suddenly quiet Ziyu, he quickly pinned both of her hands with his left to the ground. At the same time, his right hand snaked down her long slender legs, caressing them. Ziyan had understood long ago one thing: she placed a high value on her legs, abnormally high actually, even when considering the fact that they ensnared the hearts of men. At the feeling of Ziyan's hand on her legs, Ziyu stiffened, before giving off a violent screech. With his ears slightly ringing, Ziyan finished touching her, and jumped away like a monkey, proceeding to quickly flee down the mountain. He knew she would go crazy after such treatment. The screams continued for quite a while before they slowly abated. Ziyu's face was flushed crimson with anger and her eyes blazed with white-hot fury, as she stared down the barely visible blur at the foot of the mountain. Gnashing her teeth, she sharply galled, "Ziyan, you little bastard. I'll cut you into 10,000 pieces." The distant figure remained quiet, stealthy, disappearing from her field of vision soon after. "Bastard, bastard, bastard." Watching Ziyan's figure disappear, her face turned ugly as she smashed the ground next to her with both fists. After venting her fury by bashing the nearby scenery for a good while, Ziyu finally calmed down. She blushed, looking down at the several indistinct handprints dotting her legs, each left a numbness in her legs. Ziyu clenched her teeth and propped herself up, fighting the weak feeling racking her body, and wanted to cry upon seeing her messy clothes. Not only had she failed to teach the little brat a lesson, she was taken advantage of by him. The results of the encounter left a bitter taste in her mouth. Thinking back on Ziyan's actions, Ziyu felt shame and anger well up. This time, however, she didn't draw her sword and chase him like she did years ago. She was an adult now and naturally couldn't act like before, letting everyone in the clan know that her thighs had been touched by that brat. Ziyu stood there thinking for a bit, before stomping her feet and cursing in a low voice, "Little bastard. You better not give me an opportunity, otherwise it won't be pretty." Ziyu wrinkled her nose, letting her fine black hair drift in the wind. She dusted off her messy clothes, straightening them up a bit, then somewhat dejectedly started slowly heading down the mountain. After restlessly fleeing down the mountain, Ziyan quickly behind a bush. At the foot of the mountain, with cool beads of sweat running down his back. It wasn't until he saw Ziyu pass by that he could let out a sigh of relief. He rubbed his nose and unconsciously swung his right arm across his chest and grabbed his other arm. Looking off with a dreamy look on his face, he whispered, "Compared with a few years ago, touching her now feels much better. Aye, in front of this stupid woman I can never hold back my temper. It looks like my childhood grievances really do run deeper than normal." Ziyan bitterly laughed as he twisted his neck. Taking a deep breath, he pushed away the thought. After once again regaining his former tranquil state of mind, he slowly headed out. Walking away from his hiding spot, Ziyan suddenly stopped and, somewhat embarrassed, turned his head to look at the black-clothed maiden leaning against a tree in the distance. He awkwardly laughed. "Zana, what are you doing here?" The distant Zana was lazily leaning against the tree. The purple belt around her small waist flowed freely in the wind as her beautiful eyes swept over Ziyan. A fake smile was on her face as she said, "Ziyan Zheizhe, I just saw Ziyu angrily walking by. Could it be that you provoked her again?" Embarrassedly touching his nose, Ziyan walked forward and dryly chucked, "Who knows why she's in a bad mood again." Watching the laughing Ziyan, Zana couldn't help but shake her head. Whenever Ziyan Zheizhe is around with Ziyu, he inevitably can't think clearly and does some shocking things. Hearing Zana's words, Ziyan felt a little guilty, but he innocently shrugged his shoulders and said, "You know, I was forced to." Lightly laughing, Zana pursed her small lips. Her hands held behind her back. Her maiden's graceful beauty was rather moving. "Tomorrow is a day for going to the Xiao Method Pavilion to look for new techniques. Ziyan Zheizhe should prepare," she said as she left, but the sound lingered on. Chapter 48, Xiao Method Pavilion. Standing within the group, Ziyan lifted his head to look at the colossal pavilion in front of him, and let out a sigh, marveling at the amazing view before him. On the sign in front of the building were 3 engraved words, Xiao Method Pavilion, which exuded ancient grandeur. The signboard in front had a slight yellow hue and coupled with the chips and dents that covered its body, it was obvious that this place had gone through the vicissitudes of time. This was the most important place in the entire Z clan, the Xiao Method Pavilion. Every single Xiao method that the clan has gathered for the past hundreds of years were all stored here. These techniques were the foundation on which the Z clan secured its status to this day. As the most important place of the clan, the security on the pavilion was extremely stringent. On every other day, it was essentially a forbidden place that even Z clan members were prohibited from entering. It was only after the coming-of-age ceremony that this place would be temporarily opened to the clan. Squinting his eyes, Ziyan briefly swept his gaze across the several hidden corners of the pavilion that were concealed by shadows. His keen soul perception informed him that every movement made in this place was being closely monitored by the guards that were concealing themselves. In several hidden places within the pavilion, Xiao noticed that powerful auras were lurking unseen. It seemed that the clan really held this Xiao method pavilion in great esteem. Slightly turning his head, Xiao exchanged a quick glance with Zana. Both of them noticed a hint of a smile in the other's eyes. Clearly, the guards that were hidden in the surrounding area had been detected by the two of them. I have already announced the rules regarding entry into the Xiao method pavilion many times in the past, so I shall not repeat them in detail again. In short, after entering the Xiao method pavilion, all of you are to return within 2 hours. In addition, each person is permitted to only one Xiao method which is to be compatible with their attribute. You may not take more than that. If anyone tries to sneak away with more, that person will forfeit his or her right to obtain a Xiao method. Therefore, all of you best take heed. Standing at the top of the stairs, Zizhan's commanding gaze swept across the youths below him as he said this in a solemn tone. Yes, the group shouted excitedly in reply. Everyone stared at the gigantic pavilion with fiery-eyed desire. Obtaining a better Xiao method was equivalent to gaining a head start over one's peers, directly putting themselves in the lead. This had always been something that every clan member deeply desired. Since you are all clear on the rules, let us begin then. Zizhan nodded in satisfaction. He took a step back and revealed a stone pillar that was in front of the pavilion's doors. The pillar was around 1 meter in height and atop it rested a clear crystal ball. With a flourish of his hand, 2 guards that were behind started pushing at the enormous black door. The doors produced a low creak as they slowly opened. After determining your attribute, you may enter the pavilion. Remember, upon entering, follow the passage marked with your corresponding attribute. Do not accidentally wander onto the wrong path. Nodding his head towards the crowd, Zizhan gestured for the test to begin. Seeing Zizhan's signal, a youth in front excitedly jumped onto the stairs. As he laid both of his hands onto the crystal ball, a faint green glow was issued. Wind attribute, okay, you may enter. Zizhan took a sideways glance at the crystal ball and nodded with a smile. Since someone had already taken the lead, everyone below could no longer remain still. One by one, they rushed up the stairs and upon determining their attribute, swarmed en masse the Xiao method pavilion. Seeing the crowd thin around him, Xiao touched his nose and smiled at Zana. Let's go see what kind of technique we can get our hands on. Zana cutely laid her hands out. The clan's Xiao methods actually did not attract her in the least. However, since Xiao was interested, she would happily accompany him. Because the pair was not in any rush, it wasn't until everyone else had already gone in that they started to slowly walk up the stairs. Seeing this, Zizhan could only give them a helpless look. Xiao flashed a toothy grin at Zizhan and touched the crystal ball with his palm. A fiery red light, several times brighter than any before it, lit up, signifying an affinity for the fire attribute. Zizhan had already known his own son's attribute, so his expression remained unchanged. With a slight nod, his eyes suddenly darted across the surrounding area and then he inconspicuously took a step forward. Letting out a cough, Zizhan bent forward and uttered in a soft voice, "Passage of Fire, Path 3, Room 43. Upon hearing what Zizhan said, Xiao was initially shocked, but immediately found it amusing as he came to realize that his father was actually abusing his authority for his son. After giving an almost unnoticeable nod, Xiao stood aside to observe. It was now Zana's turn to be tested. Zana looked at the shiny crystal ball and hesitated for a moment. Then, as she shook her head with a reluctant look, she lightly prodded at the crystal ball with a slim finger. Following Zana's touch, the crystal ball that had just quieted down suddenly burst forth in red light again. For the briefest of moments, the ball became as hot and dazzling as a fireball. Astounded by the crystal ball that had now turned into a ball of flame, Zizhan's mouth dropped open a little as he involuntarily took in a sharp breath. The fireball persisted for a short period of time and it was only until Zana retracted her finger that the flames slowly began to die. After the light died down, one could see various thin cracks covering the entire crystal ball. Bitterly looking at the crystal ball that was on the verge of shattering, Zizon could only let out a sigh. Looking at Zana with a gaze that seemed to be filled with some hidden meaning, he waved his arm and said, "Hurry up and go in." Tisk, such a pure body of fire. Such a shame that she was not born with an affinity for the wood attribute. Otherwise, she would have been a natural-born alchemist. While Ziyin remained shocked from the incident that occurred before him, he heard Yao Lao's voice that was filled with amazement. Nodding silently in his heart, Ziyin looked at Zana, who was walking towards him. Letting out a shrug, he turned around and walked into the Cho Method Pavilion. Zizhan's eyes lingered on the two people who walked into the Cho Method Pavilion side by side and then returned to look at the crystal ball. It had finally broken into several pieces with a ka-cha sound. He stroked his chin and mumbled to himself, "Sigh, this really is way too remarkable. This girl Zana, not only does she have a good temperament, she is also a real beauty too. But her background is also extremely terrifying. She is incomparably better than that Nalan Yanran. If only Yena could have a bride like her, how nice that would be." After saying his thoughts out loud, Zizon shook his head and burst into laughter, ridiculing himself. He could not believe that he actually entertained such a wild fantasy. While Zizon was laughing at himself, he didn't realize that Zana, who was about to enter the pavilion, stiffened while her delicate ears turned, just like the crystal ball from earlier, fiery red and alluring. Chapter 49. Selecting a Cho Method. It was a little dim after stepping past the pitch-black door. Gentle lights shone from within the fire pearls that hung on the surrounding walls, giving the spacious pavilion a deep and quiet ambience. The pavilion had several wide passages branching out from the main entrance. At the start of each passage, there were large inscriptions that described the elements each passage was home to. Ziyan's eyes swept through each passage before they finally stopped on the passage of fire on the far left. Slightly feeling his nose, he turned his head sideways. However, what came into his view was a shyly blushing Zana. Astounded, he asked, "Zana, what is it?" Oh, being brought back to her senses by Ziyan's voice, Zana's crimson face actually reddened even more. It took her a few moments to gradually recover before she wrinkled her nose at Ziyan and replied in an indifferent tone, "It was nothing. Let's hurry up and look for a Cho Method." Ziyan made a baffled expression, but then pointed towards the passage of fire and said with a smile, "Let's go." Zana indifferently nodded while a hint of red still lingered on her face. Glancing sideways at Zana's attractive little face, Ziyan's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. He hurriedly led the way, looking only straight ahead. The passage of fire branched into 5 smaller paths. Within each path, the shadows of several clan members could be vaguely seen. Passage of fire, path 3. After a quick glance, Ziyan led Zana directly into the 3rd path. What was within this path appeared to be a completely different world. On both sides of the path, several meters apart from each other, were thick red-colored wooden doors. At this moment, all the doors were wide open, but within each open door was a faint red light curtain. This red curtain was a type of defensive barrier. At the same time, it also served as the final test for the youths of the clan. If someone wished to obtain the Cho Method within, they had to first break this barrier. There were already quite a few clan members who had entered this path. These people were now standing in front of several different wooden doors, viciously striking at the red barrier with flushed faces. Occasionally, the sounds of barriers breaking were heard, accompanied by celebratory cheers that rang out from within the pavilion. During those times, those who were still attacking the barriers with all their might couldn't help but show faces full of envy. Ziyin and Zana slowly walked along the path, slightly enjoying themselves, watching the clan members on both sides who burned with ardor. After taking a turn at another corner, Ziyin looked at the number engraved on the wooden door beside him. It showed number 37. He touched his nose and smiled before hurrying ahead. Finally, he stopped in front of the door marked with the number 43 and light-heartedly said, "So, this is it." Within the path, there was still more than 10 clan members around. All of them were dumbfounded when they saw Ziyin stopping in front of room number 43. This room actually had the toughest barrier in that particular path. Earlier on, several decently skilled clan members had tried to break the barrier. However, all of them ran into a wall. Unconcerned about the surprised gazes thrown his way, Ziyan slowly laid his palm on the light barrier. Enraged, by doing this, is what Uncle Z did considered abusing his authority for personal gain. Seeing Zijan's actions, Zana playfully winked her eye and softly asked with a bemused smile. After having gauged the thickness of the barrier, Ziyan turned his head around and answered with feigned ferociousness. "Little girl, you better act as if you haven't seen or heard anything. Otherwise." Amused by Ziyan's expression, Zana flashed a smile and wrinkled her exquisite face. This kind of girlish behavior instantly caused the surrounding members to become goggle-eyed. After returning a teasing smile, Ziyan took 2 steps back and stood with his legs slightly apart. Slowly, he balled up his fist and closed his eyes. Then, the dou qi inside his body started to circulate following a specific pathway at a high speed. Zana was lazily leaning against a wall, her beautiful curves perfectly wrapped up in her tight-fitting clothings. Currently her eyes were tightly locked onto Ziyan, who was gathering his dou qi. Inside those blinking eyes, pale golden flames flickered. His eyes suddenly opened. Following that, Ziyan's feet abruptly kicked off the ground. With a quick rotation of his body in midair, his back now faced the barrier. Next, his right elbow retracted as a mild wind-piercing screech sounded. Finally, he heavily punched the red light barrier as he twisted himself. Octanoblast, giving a suppressed shout in his mind, Ziyan's fist violently pounded against the barrier. Immediately, ripples started to quickly spread out from the center of the barrier. Break, following his shout and witnessed by more than 10 shocked onlookers, the red light curtain shattered like glass. Ziyan slowly exhaled his breath. With a shake of his arms, multiple popping sounds came from under his sleeve before his sleeve softened. Off to the side, watching the now shattered red barrier, Zana lightly clapped her hands and nodded with pouted lips before she said, "That is a good battle technique. The attack power is very strong." Ziyan cracked his neck and stretched his arms before he replied indifferently, "It was only so-so." Having heard Ziyan's statement, those other members in the path suddenly felt their chest tightening. Such a ridiculous battle technique was only so-so. Truly a trauma-inducing statement. Hey, let's go and see what kind of technique is kept inside. Ziyan turned his chin towards the room that had a slightly reddish hue before taking the lead to enter. The inside of the room was considerably brighter, but it was not a very spacious room. In the center of the small room was a stone table, where a dark red-colored scroll quietly laid. Ziyan walked up to the scroll and picked it up with a hint of amusement. He read the words written at the back of the scroll, Hai Wang Che Method, Incinerating Flame. This is indeed not bad. It is actually the clan's best fire attribute Che method. Hehe, seems like Uncle Z has spent a lot of effort for the benefit of Enraged. Soft laughter came from behind him. Ziyan nodded with a smile. He felt a sense of warmth in his heart. A snow-white hand suddenly shot out from behind Ziyan and took away the dark red scroll from his hands. With her head tilted as she held the scroll, Zana said softly, Enraged, even though you might be able to obtain higher-level Che method in the future, the fact is, your progress in the future will be determined by the level of training technique that you used when you first started. Hai Wang Che method, it is actually a bit low. Ziyan nodded with a faint smile. Seeing Ziyan's calm expression, Zana slightly frowned, then let out a sigh. With a flick of her fingers, an ancient-looking scroll appeared in her hand. The scroll's color was like that of a red agate. This is a fire attribute Hai Wang Che method, flame manipulation. Zana fondled the scroll and said softly, Enraged does not need to reject my offer to save face. Zana also knows that you are not someone who is overly pedantic. A high-level Che method is extremely beneficial for your future, so... Looking at Zana, who was holding a scroll in each hand, Xiao let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. He extended his hand to pat her on the head, then proceeded to take back the scroll with the Hai Wang training technique. This was done under Zana's somewhat hurt expression. Zana curled her mouth and showed a saddened expression. Her watery eyes were mesmerizing to behold. Hehe, thank you Zana, I am not rejecting your offer to preserve my reputation. With a gentle smile, Ziyan leaned forward and spoke softly into her ear. Ziyan Zheizhe can obtain an even better Che method. Chapter 50. Help. Watching Xiao leave the room with the Che method, Zana shook her head. With helplessness in her voice, she said, "I'll believe you for now." Ziyan looked at the other clan members, each shocked, while walking out of the room. With a gentle shrug of his shoulders, he waited for Zana before the two aimlessly wandered forward, casually chatting away. Since they had 2 hours together, Zana and Ziyan were not in a rush to head outside. Because the Che method pavilion was normally forbidden to everyone, it was a rare opportunity to be in it today. Thus, they decided to satisfy their curiosity. Right when they were about to leave the pathway of fire, Zana casually entered a small room and fetched Lo Zhuan Che method scroll. Accompanying Ziyan, they then continued on down the other hallways. Today would be the noisiest day of the year in the Che method pavilion. Every single hallway had a great multitude of people packed between its walls, while each person had a markedly excited look in their eyes as they smashed against the red energy curtains. Every time a curtain broke, another shout of excitement could be heard. In this enjoyable atmosphere, even Ziyan had a faint smile on his small face. Walking out from another hallway, Ziyan took a look at the time. Stretching, he laughed while looking at Zana. "We should be going. It's almost time." Nodding indifferently, Zana followed Ziyan around a corner before heading directly towards the exit of the Che method pavilion. After walking by one of the paths, Ziyan's eyebrows rose up in surprise. Not too far away, he could see a red dress that belonged to Zemi. Her charming face blushed as she wandered continuously around the front of the barrier. Based on her appearance, it looked like she was trying everything she could to get the Che method but wasn't able to break the barrier. Today, Zemi was wearing beautiful red clothing with a slightly tight skirt and a ribbon around her waist, which tied itself closely around her waist. Right now, her pure and lovely face looked anxious as her eyebrows knitted together cutely. The clansmen around her were practically falling over themselves trying to talk to her. Zemi's mood was getting worse by the second. She was basically near desperation. Before today, her father had secretly told her a room number, telling her that it was imperative to grab hold of that Che method. After conceiving every method possible and spending hours and hours, he finally got a snippet of information from the ones responsible for the arrangement of the Che method pavilion. He knew that if Zemi could get a wind attribute Hai Huang Che method, then she would be ahead of everyone else in the race for power. Although Zemi's father got the right room number, he neglected to take into account the sturdiness of the barrier on the room. Zemi had been outside of the room for hours straight, but she had been unable to break through its protections. And even though other clansmen were drooling at the thought of helping her, they couldn't even shake it. The protective curtain could only be attacked by one person at a time. And if the barrier detected 2 or more people trying to break through it, it would boost its defenses. In the end, it was like trying to draw water using a bucket with a hole. By now, 2 hours had already gone by. If she couldn't break the protections on the room soon, then Zemi would end up leaving empty-handed. Thinking about the consequences of not being able to get a single Che method, Zemi's lovely eyes could not help but begin to water. With a misty gaze, she shook her head with a bitter smile. Looking around, her beautiful eyebrows rose up as she saw someone familiar. Not too far away was a black-clothed young man holding both of his hands behind his head with a tranquil look on his face. Wiping at her face in a hurry, Zemi had already given up, but the appearance of Ziyan had brought new hope. Erasing any traces of her tears, her teeth bit into her red lips as she walked over to Ziyan in hopes that he would help her. The other clansmen around Zemi looked at her new change in appearance and followed her gaze to find Ziyan. Their low chatter slowly died down as their gazes had a hint of respect. For a moment, the originally noisy walkway immediately became silent. Even under a dozen or so gazes, Ziyan still walked forward with a look of indifference. Without even a sideways glance towards Zemi, who couldn't formulate her words, he walked past her. With her red lips slightly open, Zemi looked at Ziyan, who had just ignored her, stunned at the treatment she received. After a while, her beautiful face became filled with self-deprecation as she gently shook her head. The anger that rose in her dissipated quickly as she remembered the attitude she had shown towards Ziyan for the past 3 years. "Ha ha, this must be retribution. I really am a loathsome person." "You reap what you sow." Zmi gently squatted down to the ground. Her shoulders were twitching slightly as a stifled cry echoed throughout the quiet passageway. Looking at Zmi, who looked like an abandoned kitten as she sat on the ground. The surrounding young clansmen sighed softly while shaking their heads. Zmi sobbed lightly as she squatted on the ground. But she suddenly sensed something wrong in the atmosphere and slowly lifted her crying face only to be startled. The youth who had been walking away had turned back and was walking slowly towards Zmi with his hands behind his head. "Get out of the way," Ziyan said indifferently as he glanced at Zmi. "Oh!" Overstartled, Zmi recovered immediately with joy returning to her pretty face. And like an obedient child she made way for him. Under the curious yet grateful gaze of those who were present, Ziyan stood before the curtain which guarded the door. With his palm extended, the boy breathed in lightly. Everybody remained silent. Then suddenly, like thunder, he moved. Twisting his body, Ziyan lifted his foot and like a whip, it went forward. Making a cocker sound, it tore through the surrounding air. Bang! The ruthless kick landed on the barrier, causing ripples to rapidly pulse through it. Finally, it broke under the shocked gaze of everyone. His foot remained in the air for a while before Ziyan slowly brought his leg down to the ground. Twisting his neck a little, he turned away and then walked towards the faraway Zana. "Baje, thank you, I am sorry." Zmi timidly thanked Ziyan, passing by her. "Yeah." Ziyan glanced at the girl who had lost all of her arrogance, and gave her a slight nod before disappearing from the admiring eyes of the other clansmen.